everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. In this episode, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to visually impaired professional flautist and music teacher, Kate Risdon. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi Kate, how are you doing?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I feel like this has been a fairly long time coming, so thank you so much for doing this.
No, it's good. I feel slightly stiff. It's a very interesting experience because normally we have a very different vibe, don't we, when we meet?
We do, yeah. For audience context, because I feel like I should probably give this. Me and Kate know each other, and Kate has been my music teacher for, I think it's about 3 or 4 years now.
Is it 3? I think, are we in the 3rd year now?
I think 3, nearly 4, because you started teaching me when I was like 13.
It must be, and you were before GCSE, before
Yeah,
you made the
way
choice
before.
to do GCSE music.
Yes.
So I think we must be in the 4th year by now then, are we?
Yeah, very close to. So yeah, usually a very different vibe. So it's it's a big change, isn't it?
Yeah, but you're a lot more confident than you were when we first started.
I thought you were going to bring that up, yeah.
You were shy when we first started, and I think that might have changed now.
I was very shy, I'll give you that. Anyway, how's your day been? What have you been kind of up to recently?
My day-to-day has been quite boring, because it's been involved with life laundry and admin. So we really ought to focus on a different day to today. It's been a week of the usual sort of teaching lessons and doing emails and all the kind of things that I normally do when I'm working from home. It's been a fairly ordinary week after a very busy weekend last weekend, about which perhaps more later.
Yes, I definitely want to talk about that. And I think is probably a conversation topic that might crop up later, because it sounds like a very exciting weekend that's just happened for you.
It was an exciting weekend, and this all stems from an aspect of my work which I'm sure we'll catch up with at some point in the course of the podcast, which is the work I do as a member of the BSO Resound Ensemble under the umbrella of the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra. So it was a very busy and very exciting weekend, yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, very excited to talk about that later. So obviously you have had an incredible kind of journey within music and career in music, which I'm very excited to talk to you about. But I think the first sort of thing I want to mention is you, like myself, are visually impaired. So could you start off by telling me a little bit about your visual impairment?
Yes, I have a genetic condition called Leber's congenital amaurosis, which I found out the name for when I was in my 20s, and before that I kind of didn't really know and had no particular wish to know what it was. I was just getting on with being a kid and a teenager. So what that means is that I had some limited vision as a child and a young adult, some useful limited vision, but as I grew up through adulthood, that deteriorated, and I had a lot of eye health problems. And yeah, the vision disappeared, I suppose, finally about 2011, 2012. It's quite difficult to know exactly when because it sort of faded very gradually. But I don't have any vision left anymore, which is yeah, it's fine. I was lucky that I attended special school as a child and all the way through my schooling, and I had really great training with braille and typing and mobility skills and daily living skills. So I was a special school and a boarding school kid. And so, although I've lost the bit of useful vision that I had, it was never enough to mean that I would reprint for academic purposes. So I was trained with Braille from a young age, and that has meant that I was able, luckily, to continue at my normal everyday life and my professional life without a break or a hiatus of any kind. So, although I've lost the vision, I've managed to continue pretty seamlessly.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's such a I mean, I think that training is vital anyway, but I think especially in your case, because I suppose had you not had as much of that training, it might have meant that, yeah, as you were losing the vision as well, there was a bit of a kind of like break, like you say, a bit of a kind of, you know, lack of, things you were able to do without that training.
I
But
think the
obviously,
mobility training, certainly.
yeah.
I don't think I would have ever had enough to cope without a cane or possibly a guide dog, and I had a couple of dogs at one point. So in a funny kind of sense, not having enough vision to do that from the start was a fortunate thing. I think that the difference is now that some of that training is slower to get going in certain places, and I know a lot of my students at your age or just after their sixth form they need to take a year to boost up some of those skills that I had because I was in special school at a very young age. So, all the sort of how do you do your ironing and your laundry and all those kinds of things, we did those on Saturday mornings. They were called house lessons. I think we all hated them at the time, but um, they proved quite useful. How do you make your bed and polish your shoes and all that kind of stuff. And we did some cooking a bit, but enough to get you going while we were still in school. And we used to self-cater in the sixth form as well. If we wanted to, we could do our own suppers. So that meant you could go down into town and buy some of your own food. And there was a rather small but functional kitchenette in the sixth form wing, and that stood us in good stead for going off to university and things. And so yeah, I was trained at a young age to cope, and so I think I was very fortunate in all of that.
Definitely, yeah. I was about to say, about like setting you up for uni. Like that provides the perfect kind of stepping stone, I think. And like the fact that you were able to self-cater in sixth form and things like that, like it's just that independence that you would be you that is
I'd be lost
necessary
without,
within
yeah,
school.
because I wouldn't, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have a career without it. And
Yeah.
also, we did things like independent bus and train travel. So in my sixth form, I was um, deemed okay to travel home by train unaccompanied and back to school unaccompanied. So, um, and I'd done quite a lot of train travel with an adult before that, traveling to and from boarding school, other end of the country. So, being confident and comfortable with getting on and off buses and trains and getting assistance and things came as part of my normal teenage growing up process. And I think I was very lucky. So by the time I got to going around unis to check whether I wanted to go there or not, I can remember travelling up to Manchester from Devon on my own as a sort of 18, 19-year-old, and kind of thinking nothing of it. So yeah, it was definitely a good. a good start.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, moving forward from sort of school life then, obviously you are a very talented musician, but I'm wondering, where did your kind of love of music come from, and how did your journey into a kind of music career transpire?
My love of music was from the very beginning. I don't remember a time before music. Um, and I definitely do remember as a very small child, sort of 2.5, 3 years old, um, having my nursery rhyme record on over and over and over again, and lots of singing with um, friends or neighbors or whatever. So music was always something that I just gravitated towards. My parents weren't musicians, and my mum would say that she's not musical, but I think when they had a blind child, I was the first child, music was kind of an obvious thing to go for. And there, there was music in my grandparents, in my father's side of the family. So music was something that was around. And obviously, I think they realized that I responded very much to music. So um, it was something that I was given from a very, very young child. And then my first encounter with playing music was at play school. So I must have been somewhere around 2 years, 9 months, 3 years old, and play school was in the village where we lived, in the church hall. And as in many church halls, there was an old piano. Um, and I suppose I realized that it was there because some kids, they just bash the piano and you hear it. And I found this thing, and the keyboard was about on a level with my forehead, I think. And quite quickly realized that I could play my nursery rhyme tunes. I could work out, sort of, and here's where Zoom may or may not work, but so I found the C very quickly and figured it out. And somebody said, that child's playing tunes. And somebody had a piano they were moving on in order to get a better one. And they said to my parents, if you can have it, if you can move it, you can have it. So my parents got rid of the sideboard and substituted a piano. And I have old tapes of this piano and me playing around on it. And definitely playing through that. And finding the right note and making lots of mistakes. And I played the piano with two fingers, just your index finger and middle finger, and it was adamant that pianists only used two fingers to play the piano. I was completely stubborn about the idea that you really should use all your fingers. So my parents left that idea for a while, and all the tunes had one C in the bottom. So I had a left hand, but it didn't move very much. And I've got recordings because my granny used to she made me tapes, so I had a tape recorder. And for anybody of your generation, that's a machine which uses cassette tapes, and you probably never see them around, or you might have seen one or used one, but I kind of doubt it. But um, they were, I suppose, relatively new in. My parents bought me a tape recorder, or somebody did. It was quite heavy, and it had five very prominent buttons: stop, play, forward, rewind, sorry, and record, and it had a volume control. And I learnt very quickly how to do play and stop and fast forward, and I learnt quite quickly how to record. My granny made me tapes of stories, which was fabulous. And then we would make tapes to send her back. So we had this sort of correspondence going from very young, and Dad did me some tapes because he had to go weekly commuting for a little while we moved house. So he would send tapes. And so I learned from, I suppose, the age of 4 or 5 to listen to the stories and then to turn the tape over and record some of my own songs or some stories or piano playing on the other side and send it back to Granny, you see. So I was always recording bits of songs. Poor Granny enjoyed a lot of my piano playing. Um, and now I listen back, she must have been a very patient Granny. But I've still got her, at least one of her tapes that she sent me, which is a wonderful record of those stories and what she sounded like. And she would record a side of a record, an LP,
Mm.
on the other side. So I used to get recordings of piano music on the other side and make up ballets to them when I started ballet when I was 5. So I was surrounded by music from a very young age and played actively from a very young age. And it was just, sort of a real pull. And then I started lessons when we moved down to Devon when I was 6. And my piano teacher had the broadest Devon accent you've ever heard. And she was wonderful because she had muscular dystrophy. So her um, piano playing gradually became more and more restricted. But she was a wheelchair user from when I remember her. And so we kind of had a bit of a vibe going because if she dropped a pencil or something, she would sort of direct me and tell me where it was, and I would be able to pick it up. And she would help me with learning chords. She taught me all my chords and scales, everything by ear, and we did lots and lots of songs. And she let me make up tunes, or make me up another tune for next week, which I would do. And so I learnt all sorts of things by ear, and was allowed a lot of freedom. So I spent a lot of time making up tunes about, oh, I don't know what, just mood music for stormy weathers and stories with piano music going on in the background. And then I would I would record those and then take them into the lounge and make up all the ballets for them and stuff like that. So I was completely obsessed. And I did a lot of ballet, which meant a lot of music. So I knew all sorts of music by the time I was 7 or 8, I think. I'd done all sorts of Peter and the Wolf and the Carnival of the Animals, and I knew lots of things out of the Midsummer Night's Dream and quite a lot of ballet music and all sorts of pieces of music from a very young age. And we had lots of small records, single-sized, with a whole stack of them on the turntable, and that you would play one record at a time and then drop it down and play the next one. So you put a whole stack of records on, and they were everything from a bit of the Beatles to a little bit of Sound of Music to something by the Spinners, and it was really, really broad, and then lots and lots of classical music. So I was immersed, I would say.
Mm,
And my grandparents
definitely.
made me lots of music. And then aged
Mm.
8, I was at Granny's house and they had a record of Mozart's Flute and Harp Concerto.
Oh,
And I
right.
stood in the middle of the lounge and Grandad put this on. And I was transfixed. I just remember standing right in the middle of their lounge. I was going to do some ballet and I didn't move. Just this amazing sound of the opening of Mozart's Flute and Harp Concerto, where the strings play first and then the flute and harp come in together. I that sound always gets to me, and I think that was I have to play the flute.
Mm,
It
mm.
was a light bulb moment. So I badgered and badgered for 3 or 4 years um, until I got to boarding school, um, where the we all had piano lessons, and I'd done grade 3 piano by then. And the piano teacher said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to learn the flute." "Oh, do you?" she said. And at some point, not long after that, she said, "I found you a flute teacher, Katie." And I was absolutely thrilled. And it took me a week to make a sound, and then as soon as I managed to get a sound, somehow me and the flute just clicked. I'd done a bit of descant recording without any lessons, just picking it up myself a little bit at school. And I realized that the fingerings, certainly for the left hand, were pretty much the same. And I just played it and played it and played it until I could play it, and just went on and on and on. So that was always going to be. So I think by the age of 12, when they sort of began to say, what choices do you want to make for what predated GCSE, which was O levels, music was top of my list, and then they said, write your options down on a piece of paper, and if you have any ideas what you want to do for A level or what you might want to do as a career, then you can put that on the bottom of the sheet if you want to. So I did my O level choices, I did my A level choices, and I said I want to do music. I can remember standing in the form room, looking out the window at some point, in the evening or some evening at school, thinking, I want to do music. There's no other. There was never any other career choice.
Oh, wow. So,
Was,
I mean,
yeah,
that's been
age
such,
13, 12, 13. Yeah. There's never
yes,
anything else.
yeah, such a big part of your life then.
Mm.
Um, for a bit of a change in topic, I suppose, we are obviously both Braille music readers. Um, but are there any could you explain sort of a couple of the differences between print and Braille music that sighted musicians may not be aware of?
Yes. So Braille music, which was also devised by Louis Braille, who was a musician as well as a teacher in the Institut des Jeunes Aveugles, the Institute for the Young Blind in Paris, invented the Braille music code along alphabetic lines, if you like, rather than it being a graphics system, which print music is essentially a system of graphics. And obviously that doesn't work as a tactile form terribly well, and it's very difficult to produce a tactile version of it, and it's very difficult to feel even if you do. So Louis Braille decided that, as he was French, the scale goes do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, instead of C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And therefore D is for do. So the note C, as we would term it in English speaking countries, for Louis Braille was do. So the Braille letter D became that, and then he just simply went E, F, G, H, I, and J for the 7 notes of the octave. And as it would happen, because of the way he devised the Braille alphabet, those 7 notes, 7 pitches, only use the top 4 dots of the 6-dot Braille cell, which looks like the 6 dots of a dice. So 3 dots on the left-hand side downwards and 3 dots down on the right-hand side. And the 7 pitches only use the top 4 dots. So to differentiate different rhythms, Louis Braille decided that if you added the bottom right-hand dot to those 7 pitches, which he designated as quavers or eighth notes, if you add the bottom right-hand dot, you would get crotchets or quarter notes. If you add the bottom left-hand dot instead, you get minims or half notes. And if you add both bottom dots, you would get semibreves or whole notes. So you've got an alphabetic pitch system, and rhythm is determined by whether or not dots, we'll call them dots 6 on dot 3 of the Braille cells, the bottom right or the bottom left, are present or absent. And then, of course, the next issue would be that we haven't got anything left for 16th notes or semiquavers or 32nd notes, demi-semiquavers. So he decided what we'd do is double up. So your semi-breves look like semiquavers, but of course then you contextualize the bar. You know that in a bar of 4/4 time you cannot have more than one thing that looks like a semibreve. So therefore, what you've got must be semiquavers. So a little bit of music theory and a little bit of maths will very quickly tell you what these are. Um, accidentals are it's a clever system. You've started with D for do. So, of course, A and B and C of the alphabet are unused. So he designated A plus the bottom right-hand dot as the natural sign, and B plus the bottom right-hand dot as the flat, and C plus the bottom right-hand dot as the sharp, which I think is incredibly neat. So,
Yeah.
so if you think about it, you have got 7 pitches and sharp, flat, and natural. You've got 10 signs with which you can already make a basic tune. And then to determine the pitch of your C, whether it's at the top end of the piano or at the bottom end of the piano, you have a system of octave signs which appear before the note with a little set of rules as to when you definitely need one and when you don't. So that takes care of that. There, the notes are written all along the braille line without a space until you reach the bar line. So the space that you would normally have between two words in literary braille is the space that you have between two bars in music braille. So that works pretty well. You just look for the
Mm.
spaces. Um, and that divides your bars. And then there's a little sign for a double bar. And then there are all kinds of signs which in literary braille equate to punctuation markings and those kinds of things that are repurposed for things like articulation, so staccatos or slurs or accents. Um, there are markings for trills and grace notes and ornaments of all those sorts. There are markings for dynamics, and there's a marking, a particularly important sign, which differentiates music code from text code so that you can put in words like forte or piano or poco writ and so forth and so on, so that you can code switch, if you like, between the literary code and the music code without getting the two confused. And that's a normal thing to do within the Braille code because, of course, you have a finite combination number of
Mm.
combinations of 6 dots. So the
Mhm.
maths code, for example, does exactly the same thing. It repurposes elements of the Braille literary code for mathematical numbers and symbols. So we get very used to code switching. Um,
Yes,
and
definitely.
and I mean, it becomes slightly more complicated when you've got chords and things in piano music where you're playing two or more things at once. But in essence, though the 7 pitches and the rhythm system is relatively simple, and then you build your knowledge from there, and it becomes a little bit like decode matching up a jigsaw puzzle when you've got piano right hand and left hand, and you need to work out who plays what when, um, in terms of which hand plays first, or do they play together, and whether there are moving different rhythms, or whether you've got chords. And as you develop your code knowledge and your theory knowledge, that all slots into place.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's such a fascinating and quite impressive thing when you think about it that like Braille is 6 dots, like you say, the dots on a dice. But yet you have literary code, you have maths, you have music, all based around six dots. It's
And the language codes for all kinds of
yeah,
different languages.
yeah.
I mean, Louis Braille, of course, maybe didn't invent all of those, but he certainly invented the Braille alphabet, the punctuation markings, and the Braille music code. There have been modifications and some alterations and some additions since then, because, of course, he didn't invent code for graphics scores or X-shaped note heads and some of the things that now form part of our musical landscape. But those have been added methodically ever since, so that there is now an internationally recognized Braille music code, and there are some differences of layout and one or two slight differences of code, but it means that if I get a piece of Braille music from Italy or Australia or somewhere else, actually I can read it. And
Mm,
so that's I think that's at the start. What he started was an um, a, incredible system for making literary written music available to blind musicians, and the possibility of reading and writing your own scores. So it's
definitely.
extremely powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is. So obviously, as well as a musician, you are also a teacher. But what do you enjoy about teaching music?
Just watching people gain skill is really exciting. It's really fun to take a student from, you know, initial recorder grades, uh, and 10 years later, they get a grade 8 flute. It's a really exciting journey, and um, obviously every single student is different. So um, it's always challenging and interesting to think, okay, so what am I going to do for this student? Because what you do for one is not useful for somebody else. So I think it's the journey and watching people kind of see how far they can go. But yeah, I think watching people develop and gain skill is always exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. So, to give people a little bit more context into your teaching then, what instruments do you teach and how do you approach your teaching?
I started out teaching the flute because that was my main instrument. I started with the piano, but the flute did actually overtake the piano in terms of what I wanted to do as a professional musician. Um, Partly because I think I made quicker progress, and partly because um, it is quicker to learn flute music than piano music because you only learn one line of music, whereas the piano, of course, is two hands and multiple notes and so forth. So the piano is a bigger journey, and I didn't have sufficient technique. So I started out teaching the flute. I fell into it quite by accident. I never really thought that I wanted to become a teacher. I was not specifically aiming at that. But a colleague at work, in the office where I worked, asked me if I would take a look at her flute. She was a folk musician, an amateur flautist, um, and I said, yeah, sure. And she said, would I be able to help her get her grade 3? And I said, yeah, I can do that. So we did that, and then grade 4, and gradually, the whole thing mushroomed. Um, so yeah, I got into teaching by accident. But when now I look back, I don't know how much it was really an accident, because when I think back to what I was doing when I was a teenager, I had a really good friend at home, um, and we used to do a lot of ballet together, but we always also used to play the piano together, and we did it all by ear. I did lots of teaching her duets, and we did lots of chopsticks and very simple stuff, but we jazzed it up and made it better. And so we had a little repertoire of duets that we used to play quite a lot. And I taught my cousin quite a lot of bits of piano as well, same sort of stuff. And she played the recorder at school, and we played recorders together and sang together just for fun. So I was always kind of teaching. And then my younger brother picked up the recorder. And when I went home in the holidays, I would help him out with learning his music, which he did entirely by ear at that point. And he was learning some quite complicated stuff at a very young age. He was 10, 9, 10, 11 when he was beginning to learn sort of Handel sonatas and Telemann sonatas and
Oh, wow.
concertos. And oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. He had a sort of meteoric rise on the recorder, and he was a clarinetist as well. So by the time he was 14, he was concerto level on both. And there, occasionally he would find a recording, and the notes would go by at rather alarming speed. And I would get home in the holidays and, Sis, can you come and help me with this bit of recorder? I can't quite hear this. So we would get the tape and piece it out together. Um, and famously learned and sussed out the entire San Martini recorder concerto um, in F. We actually learnt it in E because the recording was in E, and neither of us knew about the lower half semitone lower for Baroque pitch. Nobody told us
Oh,
about that. So he was on a modern pitch descant, so he played it and learnt it in E. I have no idea how he did that because it's fiendishly difficult. It's difficult enough in F. It's ludicrously hard. And he played it in a concert not that long ago with orchestra. And it's got some incredibly long passages, where there's nowhere to breathe and full of notes. And he learnt the whole thing in E, and then sometime later discovered that he would have to play it in F and relearnt it. And so we did a lot of that. So I think my teaching was not as accidental as I may have thought. But I've taught a bit of piano. I have I started a community choir with the local church in the village where I lived, oh, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, and did annual concerts and Christmas services for 4 or 5 years with anybody and everybody who wanted to join, and all the children. So that was great fun. And I taught a toddler group singing for about 4 years, and playgroup children, the little 3-year-olds, lots of sitting in a circle singing and percussion instruments, and great fun. Um, a bit of recorder teaching, a little bit of piano teaching, not quite so much of that, but a bit. Mainly flute teaching.
mm,
And then more later on, from about the mid-20 teens, I was asked to teach one visually impaired young student, and then somebody else I heard playing, I said, I would like to help you get your braille skills faster, and I did that, and then gradually that grew, word of mouth, and I was teaching flute at the same time, and then, of course, we had COVID and all the teaching went online. And I don't think any of us had thought about teaching Braille music online until we had to.
yeah.
And gradually, I got requests from more and more people. And so, in the last 8, 9 years or so, the dial has moved, and I now teach almost all Braille music skills. And that means that the instruments that people play might range from the cello, lots of piano, some vocalists, violin, oboe, flute. It could be anything. And that doesn't really matter what instrument it is. My job is to support the Braille literacy skills to enable that, and the study of GCSE and, like yourself, the A level or BTEC or whatever. So I still teach the flute, but I also teach the braille music skills to support instrumental learning and memorizing and participation in orchestras or music theatre or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's such a valuable skill as well, like reading, being able to read music, but especially, reading braille music. And I think such a, I guess, great thing to be able to teach, because it is quite, I think braille music's quite a niche when you think about it.
It's
So
very, very niche.
having
It's
having
very niche. We are
yeah,
very nerdy.
yeah, being able to actually teach those literacy skills, because like before, obviously, before I started having lessons with you, I could sort of read braille music, but it wasn't like, it wasn't that good. And I think it's such a valuable thing, valuable skill to have, and valuable thing to be able to teach. I think that, and like you mentioned quite a lot in this so far, using your ears as well are two very valuable kind of music tools.
I sort of see them as the same, two sides of the same coin, because
Mm,
the point of being able to read music, whether you read print or braille music, is the same as the point of being able to read text. Can you take the text off the page and make it make sense? It wouldn't be any use being able to read a poem if you had no voice inside your head. It
mm,
it's very inexpressive, would it? So being able to read the words of a poem is great, but being able to make it make sense and make poetry is obviously where you're aiming. And it's the same with
mm,
reading music. And if you watch any musician who's a fluent music reader looking at a score, they are always, you can almost hear them sort of checking out the rhythm, checking out the pitch, looking at the what this music is going to sound like when you put it through your voice or an instrument. Um, so lifting it off the page is the key, and also access to independent learning. When I learnt the piano at school, which I did up to grade 8, I I wasn't taught my repertoire in my lessons. Initially, I was given the book to help me learn braille music, and I was taught bits of repertoire, but very, very quickly I was given a few bars of repertoire or given a book and the braille music book and taught something new each week and was expected to do the memorizing of my music myself
mm,
between lessons and then take back as much as I'd managed to learn and check that I'd learnt it correctly, make any corrections, and then the lesson was for mastering fingering and technique. Um, so I was an independent learner from the time where I started studying my grade 4 pieces, and I do remember that challenge because I had to learn bits of new code in order to be able to read, certainly the last one, because it had chords where the rhythm moved differently in two parts, so
mm,
it was more complicated. And I remember taking the book home over the holidays and sitting with it and puzzling out the bars.
mm,
What goes with what, and how does this music sound? And um, it was really, I suppose, yeah, it was like a puzzle. How much could I
yeah,
learn and how much could I remember? And so I wasn't taught by rote, but my ear was absolutely vital because when you when you suss out the music on the piano, did it sound right? Yeah,
mm,
pretty much. It must be pretty much right. Well, hang on, that sounds wrong. Have I made a mistake here? What? So your ear is vital, and so getting your ear and the and what you see on the page to coalesce, as it were, is such a valuable skill because that leads to your ability to pick up a piece of music and go, "Oh, this looks interesting. I might fancy learning this." Um, and being able to do that memorizing process entirely independently of anybody else. And
Mm.
once the piece is in Braille, there you don't need sighted assistants to learn it. You don't need a teacher. You can do it for yourself. So you have much greater autonomy and choice. I used to go through the music bookshelves at school and look at things and pull them off and go, oh, this looks interesting, and take it into the practice room and have a little look at the first few bars and go, oh, this looks really nice. And then get to a bit I couldn't possibly play, as Debussy preludes, and think, oh, how on earth do you play that? But the point was that I could read it for myself and explore for myself. Um,
Yeah.
and that gives great freedom. And it also meant that I had a way of writing down my own ideas as well if I wanted to.
Mm.
So without that, I don't think I would have had a career at all. And
Mm.
it's a great
Yeah.
joy. It's a real great joy to learn. Um, what's I remember? I remember learning the suite for flute and piano by Vidor, which I'd heard on the radio. I thought, oh, that sounds good, and I had it produced in Braille. And looking at the score and looking at some of the dynamics and some of the accents, and it's sort of hit me hit me really. It comes straight off the page, and you look at it and go, wow, look at that. That's incredibly dramatic. Just by looking at what he's written on the page, you can go, oh, look, this is really cool music. And how am I going to play it? It doesn't matter what anybody else decides to interpret it as, or how anybody other decides to play it. What am I going to do with this music? What does it say to me? Whereas if you only have a recording, you are subject to somebody else's interpretation, and you're also dependent on whether they've played it totally accurately or not, which they
Mm.
may have
Mm.
done, or they may not have done, or they may have taken license with the rhythm, or all sorts of things can happen. So you have the composer's intentions as he or she wrote it right there
Yeah.
under your fingers, and I
Yeah.
think that's a magic that you cannot replicate kind of any other way.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you there. Now moving on to another kind of strand of what you do. Can you tell me a little bit about the orchestra that you play with?
Well, orchestra playing came very late in the career, um, staggeringly late. So when I was growing up, because I think again because Braille was produced by hand on a Perkins, because there was no real computer technology at that point, the amount that you had access to was limited. I had access to all the stuff that RNIB had in its back catalogue at that point, which goes right back to the 1920s. But flute music was limited, and the idea of somebody playing in an orchestra without seeing the conductor and memorizing orchestral music really just didn't figure. There was lots of choral singing. I did a lot of choral singing at university with some of the big choral repertoire, and that was the nearest thing I got to being a part of a big ensemble. So I sang in the university chorus, and I sang in the Leeds Philharmonic chorus.
Mm.
That was probably the highlight of my university career. Don't broadcast that to my erstwhile lecturers, for goodness sake. But it was the thing that has stayed with me very vividly, singing things like the Mozart Requiem or Belshazzar's Feast. If you don't know Belshazzar's Feast, it's well worth a listen. And Carmina Burana, and the Stravinsky Symphony of Psalms, and things like that as a soprano in a huge chorus. It's absolutely magic with full orchestra, and Belshazzar's Feast is a massive orchestra,
Mm.
and even organ as well. So there's a in Leeds Town Hall. So that was my introduction, if you like, to working with big orchestra, big forces, and a world-renowned conductor, which we had. It was magic. But as for playing in an orchestra, or even in a flute ensemble, or even in a duo or a trio, I had very, very, very limited experience. Um, I knew what I wanted to do, but it just never ever figured.
Mm.
Um, Gradually, as the career went on, and I did more teaching, and I had another colleague who was visually impaired, and I went on some flute courses with the late, great, amazing Atara Bentovim, um, who was just awesome as a mentor, wonderful. And so I had an exposure there through her to flute ensemble music for the first time in my 20s, and I learnt one or two bits of that. Um, and then lots of gap, and I did some flute ensemble music with my own students. In fact, I think one of my most fun concerts was where I got my students and some other colleagues' students and pulled them all together in a ginormous 19 flute choir and found a harpist and brought her students in. We had 5 harps. That was the biggest one. That was fun. So ensemble music of that sort of size. But it wasn't until the British Para Orchestra was begun by Charles Hazelwood that music in an orchestral context for disabled musicians began to be a reality for, musicians who aspired to being professionals and who were already professionals but weren't playing nearly enough. Some of them because they couldn't get a wheelchair on the stage, but for the visually impaired musicians also because access to a viable way of making orchestral music and access to the parts. And the British Power Orchestra, as you know, made their big headline debut in the 2012 Paralympics. And I was involved for a short while with them, and that was very exciting. They, at that point, were working with a very much sort of workshop style way of producing music that everybody was involved with devising. And just seeing what would work and what did and what didn't work. And it was terrific fun. And suddenly we had opportunities to play in schools, and suddenly Charles wanted to take us to abroad and suddenly collaborate with a mainstream symphony orchestra. And I was like, wow, this is exciting. And I suddenly found myself in the Qatar Opera House in Doha, which was very exciting, with string players from their orchestra in the Opera House in Doha and members of the British Power Orchestra. I mean, what goodness, that was news at that time. Um, and the Power Orchestra have absolutely gone from strength to strength. I haven't played with them for a while now, but they are very much a thing, and they are making music of a very particular kind and very innovative and very experimental in a lot of ways, and they collaborate with all kinds of musicians. But there's still very much a space there for visually impaired musicians to inhabit, and it does now include the more conventional written part that you need to memorize and play, you know, at the
Mm.
right notes at the right time.
Mhm.
So that was that, and then in 2018, at the point at which I was busy teaching, really busy, and just about to go to Prague to play a concerto with an orchestra and another blind clarinetist, an email landed in my inbox that had come via the music advisory service at RNIB, saying that the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra was seeking disabled musicians to start an ensemble, chamber ensemble, and applications were now being sought. And I thought, oh, good Lord, have I got. The closing date was literally just before I went to Prague to play a concerto. So timing just terrible, really. And I thought, can I take on any more? Can I do this? And I thought, I better take a look at it because these things don't come up very often. I better have a look and see what they want. So I opened up the link, read it, and went, I can do all the things they want us to be able to do, which included having a way of reading music,
Mm-hmm.
whether braille or whatever, but you needed to be able to read music fluently in one medium or another. You needed to be playing at a professional level, and you needed to be able to sustain your playing for, rehearsals or concerts or whatever, and so on and so on. And I thought, I can tick all of those boxes. I really have no excuse not to apply. I really couldn't justify not applying, so I applied and was called for audition and went down to audition about 3 days before going off to Prague, which meant preparing, more different music and all that sort of thing, which is pretty standard stuff for musicians to need to be able to cope with. And I got back from Prague having played a concerto, and I got a phone call to say I'd been selected, which was phenomenal. And it was like it started pretty much straight away. We were straight into rehearsals, first rehearsals, and the extraordinary thing was that the first thing they did was they said, what do you already know? What have you already got that you could play? And I thought, I mostly play solo stuff. So I gave them a list of things I already knew, which included Mozart, one of the Mozart flute quartets and one or two other bits and pieces. And they arranged some of the stuff I already knew for ensemble, and they produced some parts of stuff that I didn't know, which I was able to get transcribed. And we had a very fast turnaround of music. So suddenly needed to learn music for a specific rehearsal rather fast, and go off down to Dorset to rehearse with this group of musicians. And we were quite a disparate bunch. There were 6 of us with differing disabilities. There's a flute and a clarinet, violin, cello, and percussion, and the linstrument, which is an electronic instrument, which acts like a synthesizer but is designed to be played by people who have limited strength or mobility, and find conventional instruments impossible to play. So we had this, which was rather unusual, and obviously ticked the box that said, yeah, we can include all sorts of different musicians with all sorts of different disabilities in this one ensemble. And that was sort of January 2018, and by April 2018 we'd got some concerts under our belts. We'd done an inaugural performance to some of the people funding this, and we had some schools concerts in the diary, and then suddenly, yes, the inbox. This is this thing that can surprise you. BSO has been asked to play at the BBC Relaxed Prom in August, and we would like BSO Resound, as we were named, to take part in this concert. Would you be free on the 26th of August, I think it was? I thought, oh, I think I can be free for a performance at the prom. I'll say yes. I think I can make myself available for that. What on earth? And it was sort of 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night when I read this email. And that your heart does a big thud. And then it says, this information is strictly confidential. It's embargoed by the BBC because they haven't announced the prom schedules yet. So I couldn't tell anybody. I told my husband, I said, I can't tell anybody. Couldn't tell my parents, couldn't tell my brother, couldn't tell my students, couldn't tell a single soul. It was strictly confidential. So there it was. And I think that was April, and very quickly its repertoire started coming through. I remember getting the first bits of repertoire in about the April, and we were already rehearsing sketches for a, a new composition, a commissioned composition at that point. So we had a rehearsal in Bristol, and I can remember going off at the end of that rehearsal just to take a weekend away with, some of the new parts in my hand and kind of, you know, I spent 6 months learning music, reading scores. I would take my scores in the car. I took them to the cafe. I took them to the gardens in the National Trust. I read them in bed. I read them at the kitchen table. I just everywhere I went. And actually, I also, you know, I quite often read scores in, hospital waiting rooms and doctor surgery, anywhere where had a minute of time and I needed to learn the music. I had a score in my hand.
Mm.
Um, it was just surreal. So as it turned out, and we were going to integrate into the main symphony orchestra. So the idea was that BSO Resound would have a specially commissioned piece to play at that prom, which we did, but then we would also be integrated into the full symphony orchestra. So I was suddenly playing second flute alongside the BSO principal flautist and the piccolo player in a main symphony orchestra,
Mm.
paid and on broadcast on BBC Radio 3 and filmed for BBC CBeebies. Um, and apart from the concerts with the British Power Orchestra, which were very much devised music,
Mm.
and apart from a, a concert of some of the repertoire, but not all, in the park in Bournemouth, one of these summer evening concert in the park concerts, that was my first professional orchestral concert.
Mm. Hmm.
Utterly, utterly insane.
Yeah, it
That is, I
definitely.
mean, ludicrous. No other musician, if you're going to play at the proms, mostly you've been through music college and you've done youth orchestras and college orchestras and chamber orchestras and professional orchestras and semi-professional. You've played a lot
Mm.
in that field, and I hadn't. It was
Yeah, I
absolutely
mean,
new.
what an experience. I mean, that is such an incredible thing to be a part of. And I think that ensemble and, the things that, you guys were able to achieve, it's really brilliant.
Well, it was life-changing because it changed a number of things. It changed expectations among musicians about what was feasible. It changed my expectations of what my own performing career might look like. Um,
Mm.
it suddenly included professional chamber music and orchestral music, and it changed what I expected to teach. And as I was
Mm.
beginning to get visually impaired young people through who needed to learn braille, it changed the progression routes that um, I, as a teacher, envisaged um, quite significantly, but it also has now begun to lead to opportunities um, for them involving professional orchestral musicians and so on. So, for example, the Symphony from Scratch weekends that BSO have done in the last 3 years have included visually impaired braille reading musicians. Um, this year, the British Para Orchestra had a weekend workshop called Play with Para Orchestra, and one of my students was involved with that. Um, I think it really has begun, and it has included sort of thinking about all these students playing with their local music hubs and their Saturday morning orchestras or school orchestra, um, and that kind of thing. So it's really become um, a way of thinking about how you memorize orchestral music, what are the tools you need to do it, um, and what's the model for this,
Mm,
and
yeah.
the progression route, but also, okay, what is a realistic career path for somebody who wants to take this to professional level? What is possible? What's kind of a bit unrealistic, which is probably a full-time orchestral chair, um, because the amount of music they put through, because they can sight read everything, is enormous. Um, and I haven't yet tried learning a full-length Mahler symphony, for example. I have learned a Beethoven symphony, and that was fine. But some pieces of music are on a different scale, and there's a lot of it around. But what is realistic and what can be done? And I think that has really developed and is an ongoing development and dialogue. And there's all sorts of interesting facets of that. Like, there is, of course, Aurora Orchestra, who once a year do, as an orchestra, an entire symphony from memory, um, brilliantly. And of course, that's very interesting, and we haven't yet begun to explore that possibility with visually impaired musicians. But the fact that it's a thing means that there's a sort of interesting collaborative and um, artistic possibilities yet to be explored. Um, and that's very exciting.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's very clear to see that progression. I think it's brilliant progression and very exciting to see what kind of comes in the future. But my next question for you is one that I ask all my guests actually, or certainly most of them, and probably one of my favorites to ask. And it is, what would you say has been your proudest moment so far?
Well, the proms has to come pretty high up the
I
list.
thought it might, yeah.
That's a bit of a mega opportunity. It was extraordinary.
Mm.
And pretty euphoric. It took me a while to come down again off that one. And it was 6 months of walking around my house pinching myself, going, really? And that was wonderful. The concerto in Prague that I alluded to was pretty amazing. I got the opportunity to play with an orchestra and visually impaired, wonderful clarinetist in Prague, um, at the Spanish Hall in Prague Castle, which is huge and very ornate and very fine. It's a beautiful, beautiful venue with the most enormous acoustic. Um, and that was a concert by under the auspices of the Czech Blind Society. I think that's their correct title. Forgive me if I've got that wrong. But um, they did an annual, or they possibly still do an annual concert opportunities, concerto opportunities for blind musicians, and so that was pretty special. Um, yeah, going to Doha, that was exciting, but also, um, even last weekend, the symphony from scratch, taking 5 students to sit in a symphony orchestra and play whatever they had managed to memorize in an inclusive environment which said, if you don't play all the notes, that's fine, don't matter. If your bowing isn't perfect, we're not going to worry about it. We've specifically created parts for instruments that aren't normally in this piece of music, but we've added some extra parts, um, for example, for piano and for some of the electronic instruments played by some of the members of the National Open Youth Orchestra, so that they can be included in symphony orchestra music. Um, we've simplified some of the parts so that students and players who are towards the beginning of their instrumental journey can play something. They sent out the parts nice and early so that I could create the braille, and they sent audio mock-ups of the full orchestra with a metronome click and without a metronome click, with the students' instrument raised in the mix so they could combine learning oral and braille skills together and get a sense of what the whole piece sounded like and where their part fits into it. And actually, I learn all my orchestral stuff like that. I don't think I could do it without those mock-ups or without a recording of the original piece. But they provided all those files well in advance so that there's a chance to learn your stuff as much as you could. They sat all the young musicians with orchestral professionals so they could have some mentoring and a bit of help where they needed it. Um, and they did some wonderful touch tours, which I asked if they would, any of the instrumentalists or the professional musicians would mind showing their instrument hands-on. So we had a wonderful look at the tuba and the bassoon and the violin, and in the last couple of years people have seen harp and horn and double bass and things. So an opportunity to get hands on those instruments that you hear every time you hear an orchestra but don't necessarily know what they look like or how they're actually played. And it's totally valuable. And an opportunity to work hands-on with the conductor for 10 minutes just to know how he's actually beating time and how he's going to conduct a pause and those kinds of things that if you don't see, you would never know. No real concept of what the conductor is actually doing with their hands. So that sort of really inclusive approach is just A, really exciting, and B, so refreshing, so that there's always a we can do kind of attitude. And I think that has been really exciting. I'm really pleased and proud to be involved with that.
Absolutely. I mean, that is just like sounds like the most incredible experience, and I reckon something that the everyone who was able to be a part of that will treasure. Because I think
Oh,
that
yeah.
yes, so incredible.
Well, I mean, we had members of the main symphony orchestra, so the professional musicians, and then we had adult community orchestral musicians who play with BSO players when they have their participate events, and then the members of National Open Youth Orchestra, plus my own five Braille reading students, one of whom is a member of NoYo, and the others of whom are not at the minute. But it was just a really lovely group, and lots of parents able to be there and so forth. And um, we finished up the weekend with an informal performance, which we called a sharing performance rather than a formal concert. So very um, informal and relaxed, but nonetheless a performance. So chance to play, but without it being absolutely terrifying, and sitting in the same chair that you've sat in all weekend. So there's no big deal, not having to get dressed up or whatever. It's very, very pleasant atmosphere, and that meant that the people who had funded or helped to fund the weekends could get to see what was happening, and people could chat to them and tell them what what they thought of the weekend and what it meant to them. So yeah, a really busy but really good weekend, and that's the third of those now, and I think they're just going from strength to strength. So yeah, I think it's a as far as I know, a pretty unique opportunity. I don't remember being in an orchestra, in a symphony orchestra, with five or six Braille reading musicians, and a lot of other young disabled musicians before. So I think we're chipping away at our sort of these barriers that have historically existed.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, very fair thing to say. I think you certainly are. Well, looking forward to the future then, do you have any sort of goals or aspirations for the future that you'd like to achieve?
I still want to perform the Mozart flute and harp concerto.
Ah,
That's my, well, it's not a secret if I put it on a podcast, is it? But
yeah,
that's my still on the bucket list, if you like.
fair
Um,
enough.
because that's where the flute journey really started. That's definitely still on the bucket list. Um, I think there's lots and lots of repertoire that I've yet to play, and of course I work as a duo musician when time and headspace permits with my husband, who's also a professional flautist, and there's lots of concert repertoire I want to perform as part of that duo, um, which is where I suppose my roots are in the flute world, the French and English flute repertoire, which is just beautiful. So you know, amongst all of this, I like to keep a foot in that camp and make sure that I keep my flute head still on, if that makes any sense at all. Um,
Yeah.
there are lots of private, sort of personal goals. The piano, which doesn't get practiced nearly as much as I would like, because I'm often busy learning repertoire for resound, which is still ongoing, and we still do concerts in schools. Quite often, we do concerts in special schools where students have um, multiple learning needs and wouldn't be able to easily or at all get out to mainstream concerts. And so we go in and give them concerts in their school setting where they can um, respond vocally or move around, or if they need to go out and just take a little bit of chill time, they can. So we still are doing repertoire for those, and so I learn quite a lot of repertoire. I do spend quite a while at my piano with my audio stuff, drilling notes into my head. Um, I have a list of pieces which I will remember as being oh my goodness kind of pieces, which a challenge to learn. Um, Always great fun when you get to the concert and you actually know it, but the learning
Yeah.
process is, as you know very well, the learning process can be, when you start at the start of it, can be really challenging, and the
Yeah.
motivation required for it is quite serious. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I've got a lot of piano music that I would love to um, memorize and put under my fingers because, again, things that I've known and loved all my life. Um, and I have started to take an annual um, piano weekend course. I did one this year, and I've put my name down for another one next year, just to spend a weekend with the piano, taught by a really fabulous professional concert pianist, just to imbibe that repertoire and get some um, sort of tips and hints and things. And I really valued that this year, to go back to my roots and take a piano lesson for the first time in decades
Mm.
was wonderful. So I thought, no, I must do that again. Um, goals. Yeah, to pick out some of the pieces that I wrote yonks ago and actually get them into a form that means I can produce um, a, a score and actually to write. Um, all the ideas are stuck in the head and don't often get time to really explore. So the creative side, I guess,
Mm.
where I've had my roots and spent my entire childhood improvising and making up tunes and songs and things, to explore that, and that requires time and headspace, which is in often in short supply. But those are the
Mhm.
goals, and yeah, just to keep teaching. I think the teaching is important, and to try and promote. the students that I have, and so many of you lot are extraordinarily um, potentially really, really, up there. And I think that it's important that we make sure that that opportunity is there, because it's a genuine possibility to make a freelance career in the arts, um, and in the music sector if you can't see. People have been doing
Mm,
it for a very long time, incidentally. I mean, Louis Braille was one in a chain of some very eminent blind musicians before him and after him, and it's a well trodden path, but it's not well trodden enough,
mm.
given the talent pool that we're fishing in. And so I think, I'm really committed to ensuring that we bang the drum for visually impaired musicians.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I wish you the very best of luck with all of your aspirations, but especially I hope that one day you are able to play that flute and harp concerto because that would be very special.
Oh, yes. I think if I was ever able to do that, I would have to work very hard to curb the excitement and actually concentrate on the notes.
Yeah,
Because,
I can imagine.
yeah, I mean, it is just the most iconic bit of flute music. Given that Mozart said he didn't really like the flute, it's just glorious. But it's yeah, it's definitely up there with pieces I want to have played.
Absolutely, I can see why. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I mean, I think you are just such a remarkable musician and teacher. I mean, you've taught me so much. You got me through GCSEs, and you've taught me pretty much all of my Braille music skills. So I think you are a very remarkable person, and it's been lovely to, get to hear your kind of journey in more detail than I had before. And yeah, just thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, it's been a pleasure to get to chat to you, and thank you so much to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.